What if your partner secretly built a multi-million-dollar empire using your money? This story exposes a shocking financial scheme involving stolen inheritance, shell companies, and corporate manipulation. But more importantly, it shows how intelligence, strategy, and resilience can reclaim everything that was taken.
8 months pregnant and freezing in the Chicago wind, Eleanor's wool coat felt useless against the chill. The keypad to her own penthouse flashed red, denying her access. Through the terrace doors, she saw another woman directing movers in the living room. Her husband had just locked her out for his head of acquisitions. He figured she would shatter, a minor detail in his portfolio of success. He gambled she was too broken to retaliate and too naive to see his betrayal. He was mistaken because Eleanor was about to expose his web of shell corporations, 2 years of deception, and a hidden trust amendment that left her and their unborn son with absolutely nothing. This is the story of how a cast-off wife, pregnant and abandoned in the biting wind, unraveled the real estate magnate who discarded her. We're liquidating the asset. 3 words. That was everything she got from the man she had loved for 5 years. The man who once bought a small vineyard for their anniversary. The one who helped her design their son's nursery, basing it on the star map from the night they first met. The man who whispered dreams for their son's future to her belly every single night. 3 words that cracked the foundation of the world Eleanor thought she shared with Marcus. She stood frozen on the private terrace of their home, the one she believed was a monument to their shared dream. The home where she dreamed their sons would take their first steps on these heated marble floors, raised in a world of integrity. The wind howled off Lake Michigan. A distant train horn sounded like a warning she had failed to hear. The cold, city air blasted across the terrace, stinging her skin. Marcus, her husband, and her child's father stood there. He was holding the original blueprints for the rooftop garden she had designed, a project he once cherished. He let the papers go from his hands over the glass barrier, not caring about their child, her bare hands, her shivering, or that she was his wife. The schematics scattered silently into the urban darkness. Her life's work was gone. Her name, Eleanor Thorne, suddenly feeling like an alias. Marcus. Her voice was a strangled whisper. What is this? I don't understand. She reached toward him, her hand unsteady, looking for the man she had married. He recoiled as if her touch was a bad investment, something to be shed. I told you, we're liquidating. His tone was detached, like a developer discussing a demolition. Are you not understanding or just being hormonal? Hormonal? The word was a wrecking ball, blunt and cold. He had never used such a cruel tone with her before. Marcus, if there is an issue, please tell me. We can solve it. We're a team, that's what you always said. The tears finally fell, hot against her frozen skin, swept away by the damp wind. Marcus let out a short, harsh laugh. The sound she once cherished now sounded like breaking stone. Solve it? You can't solve this, Eleanor. You create beautiful things. You add decorative touches. I build empires. Your empires? The pain was now sharpened by disbelief. Marcus, we built this entire life together. No. He shook his head, a faint, ugly smile on his face. I built it. You were just excellent staging. At that moment, a woman emerged from their master suite. Sophia, the ruthless new head of acquisitions from his company, appeared as if she were assessing a new property. 30 years old, with a severe black bob, and wearing the diamond earrings Marcus had given Eleanor for their first anniversary. She assessed the penthouse as if it were a new line item on a balance sheet, as if Eleanor were already gone. This is over, Marcus's voice was final. Sophia's moving in. Your key fob has been deactivated. You have 2 minutes to leave the premises before security is called. The words felt unreal. Key fob. Security. Each was a separate kind of violence. Sophia was taking her place in her home, in her life, effective immediately. Not tomorrow, not after some discussion. Now. While Eleanor trembled, her sanctuary transformed into an impenetrable fortress. The doors were now sealed against her. And Marcus would have security remove her like a vagrant, as if she hadn't personally selected every piece of art or spent months planning the nursery. "The baby!" she gasped, her hands flying to her stomach. She felt their son kick, a hard, sharp movement as if he sensed his mother's terror. "Marcus, I am 8 months pregnant. It is freezing out here. Where am I supposed to go?" Sophia moved to stand beside him. She slid her arm into his with a familiarity that made Eleanor's stomach churn. "This was not a new arrangement. That is no longer our concern," Sophia stated, her voice like ice. "You should have maintained your market value." Our. That word confirmed everything. Not his problem, but theirs. Marcus and Sophia, a new corporate entity, and Eleanor was the asset they had just written off. "How long?" she whispered. "How long has this been?" 18 months, Sophia said, a flash of triumph in her dark eyes. "Since the Singapore acquisition. Before you were even married. You had the right social connections for his public profile, the one to project the family man image." 18 months. The lie was a chasm that ran through their entire marriage. His proposal on a yacht in the Mediterranean, every vow, every shared ambition, every intimate moment, it had all been a calculated business move. "You are lying," Eleanor whispered, her brain unable to process the brutal reality. "That cannot be true. Marcus, tell her she is a liar." He finally looked at her, his eyes flat and distant, completely empty of any empathy for her. How had she missed it? How had she been sleeping beside a total stranger? "Your brother lives in New York," Marcus said, his voice without any emotion. "Call him or don't. It is of no importance to me. Just go." He turned from her, putting his hand on Sophia's lower back. They were a solid, unmovable unit. "Please." The word was a raw, fractured plea. "Please, Marcus." She choked on a sob. "Don't do this to us." The heavy glass door slid shut. The electronic lock clicked home, and Eleanor was left alone in the biting cold. Her garden plans were lost to the wind below. The elegant ET monogram on her briefcase now seemed like a cruel irony. Her coat was thin and useless against the gale. Her feet were growing numb on the cold stone of the terrace. She gazed through the windows of the home she had brought to life, a wall of glass glowing with a life that had been hers, her creations. Her entire future was inside. In the master bedroom, a shadow appeared. Sophia, closing the automated blinds, wiping Eleanor from the scene. Then the warm light from the nursery switched off. Eleanor watched the window go dark, and a cold dread washed over her. Sophia was not just stealing her husband. She was stealing their son's future. The nursery, with the antique mobile she had so carefully restored, was now for another woman's child. The custom crib she had ordered, the silver rattle that was a family heirloom, it was all being erased, like a bad dream she could not wake from. Her whole life was on the other side of that locked door. Her wallet, her cell phone, her car keys. She was left with only the baby inside her and a cruel Chicago wind slicing through her thin dress. The headlights of a passing car lit Eleanor up for a moment, then moved on, indifferent. Just another pregnant woman on a Lincoln Park street after dark. Nobody paid her any attention. She forced her legs to move. The sidewalk was cold and uneven, and loose pebbles dug into the soles of her bare feet. A shard of a broken bottle shone under a street lamp, a small menace. She kept going, one foot, then the next. Protect the child. She ignored the sharp pain in her feet. She ignored the biting chill. She ignored the face of Marcus, the man who had promised her unwavering security before casting her out like garbage. The grand brownstones of the street were dark, protected by wrought iron gates. Cold rain began to fall from bare tree branches onto manicured lawns. The homes were quiet, their occupants asleep in warm beds, unaware of the pregnant woman walking through their perfect world. No one saw, no one helped. A pharmacy sign glowed a few blocks ahead, its green cross a faint beacon in the overwhelming night. Eleanor fixed her eyes on it. One objective: reach that light. The rest could be handled later. Her feet were now bleeding. She felt the warm wetness mix with the cold rain. small crimson smudges on the dark sidewalk, proof of her fight that the storm would wash away by morning. The pharmacy's automatic door slid open with a quiet whoosh. The sterile atmosphere was a shock. It smelled of antiseptic and plastic. The fluorescent lights hummed loudly above. The pharmacist looked up from his tablet. He was an older man with a kind, tired face and a name tag that said George. His eyes widened when he saw her. "Good heavens, young lady." The diner waitress was at her side in an instant, her voice sharp with concern as she took Amelia's elbow. "Oh my goodness, what happened to you? Do you need a doctor? Are you all right?" Amelia tried to answer, but words failed her. A powerful shiver racked her body, her teeth chattering as the indoor warmth made her realize the depth of her shock. "Phone," she finally managed. "I need to call my father. Could I please use your phone?" The waitress instantly pulled a phone from her apron and placed it in Amelia's trembling hand. "Of course, dear. Use it for as long as you need." The barista showed her to a small corner booth, a safe harbor from the hurricane inside Clara. She came back with a company sweatshirt, putting it gently over Clara's shaking shoulders. "I know that expression," she said quietly, her voice full of an empathy that comes only from shared pain, when the person you built your whole life around suddenly becomes a complete stranger. Clara looked up at the young woman, who was showing her more humanity than the husband to whom she had dedicated her life, more grace than the man who swore to protect her. Her thumb trembled over the screen, one ring, then two. "Answer, Dad, please." "Hello?" His voice was a low rumble, thick with sleep. "Who is this?" "Dad?" The name felt foreign, a title she hadn't used since childhood fears of the dark. "It's Diana, I need you. Can you come and get me?" A pause. She heard the distinct sound of bedsheets being thrown aside, the thud of feet on a hardwood floor, and the familiar clatter of keys being grabbed from a ceramic dish. "Diana, what's your location?" His tone was instantly sharp, wide awake. "The old 24-hour diner on Atlantic, the one by the marina." The sobs returned, a storm that mirrored the rain lashing the windows. "Dad, I don't know what to do." "I'm leaving now. I'll be there in under 15. Don't you move from that booth. Stay put. I'm almost there." The line went dead. Diana huddled in the worn vinyl seat, a small, ruby-colored stain spreading on the linoleum from the rain and the glass in her feet. The baby shifted, a soft, determined nudge. A silent promise. "I am here. We are safe. We can do this." "I know, sweet boy," Diana murmured, her hands cupping her stomach. A secret conversation with her unborn son. He was the one thing that was hers alone, the one who would never betray her. "I know. Mama will handle it. You'll be safe. I promise. No one will ever hurt you." The waitress, a woman named Chloe, set a mug of decaf coffee on the table. It was weak, but the warmth was a comfort. "I'm Chloe," she said softly. "You don't have to talk, but you listen. Whatever he did, none of it is on you. Do you hear me? Guys like that, they're experts at flipping the script. They'll make you believe you're the one who failed, but you're not. This is his mess, every last bit of it." Diana stared at the woman, Chloe. A kindness she would carry with her forever. "Thank you." The words were barely a whisper, but they were all she had. "Thank you for your kindness, for not prying." "Prying can happen later when you're ready," Chloe replied, giving her shoulder a gentle squeeze. "For now, you just breathe. Help is on its way." And it was. Just as he'd promised. Less than 15 minutes later, her father's dark gray sedan screeched to a halt at the curb. He was out of the car before it was fully in park. 64, with silver hair, wearing a thick wool coat over his pajamas and loafers on the wrong feet. He had obviously dressed in a blind panic and broken every speed limit. He marched into that diner like a general ready to storm a fortress for his daughter. "Diana." He knelt beside her booth, his large, steady hands cupping her face. These were the hands that had built a logistics empire from scratch, the same ones that had rocked her to sleep as a baby, the hands that had only ever offered strength. "I'm here. Dad is here. Everything is going to be all right now." He nodded at Chloe. a whole conversation passing between them without a word. His silent, overwhelming gratitude, and her firm nod of solidarity. "Thank you," her father said, his voice strained with emotion, "for watching over my daughter." "Just get her and the little one checked out," Chloe answered, handing him a clean dish towel. "And for what he did? Make him wish he'd never been born." Her father guided Diana to the car, leaving faint crimson footprints on the checkered floor. Chloe was already reaching for a mop. The car was a haven of warmth, the vents blasting hot air. A quiet classical station played. The comforting smell of leather, old paper, and her father's spearmint gum surrounded her. It was the scent of safety. He drove without a word, his knuckles pale on the steering wheel, his fury a palpable force inside the vehicle. Diana wanted to spill the entire story, to let the awful truth pour out, but a fresh surge of shock silenced her each time she tried. "You don't have to say anything," her father finally said, his voice taut. "Not until you feel ready. We're heading to Mass General. To get you seen, make sure the baby is okay. That is our only priority." "The hospital?" The word cut through her daze. "Why the hospital? I'm fine." "Because your feet are bleeding. Because you just ran through a freezing downpour. Because you are 32 weeks pregnant and have just suffered a terrible shock." Her father looked over at her, his face a mixture of fierce love and ice-cold anger. "Because I will not take any chances with you or with my grandson." His grandson. He was already claiming him, ready to defend and cherish him. Diana started to cry again, but this time it was different. It was the release of gratitude, the crushing relief of knowing that even though her husband had discarded her, she was not lost. She had her father, her son, herself, and right now, she realized, that was more than enough. The hospital was a blur of fluorescent lights, urgent voices, and methodical chaos. Diana felt like she was watching a film about someone else's life. The red glow of the emergency sign painted streaks on the wet asphalt outside. Nurses and doctors moved with purpose. A baby cried somewhere down the hall. A monitor kept its steady, electronic rhythm. Her world had imploded while she sat shivering in a wheelchair. She was now in a thin, paper-like hospital gown. Her feet, now cleaned and bandaged, throbbed with a dull, persistent pain. The cuts were deep, but the doctor assured her there was no permanent damage, just the brutal result of running nearly 10 blocks on city pavement after fleeing the tech gala. The baby's heartbeat filled the room, a rapid but strong 155 beats per minute, a small, resilient drum in the center of her wreckage. "Your blood pressure is elevated," Dr. Evans said, her voice calm and professional. But Diana saw the fury in the doctor's eyes, a mirror of her own. "We need to get that down. This kind of stress isn't good for either of you." Diana's hand flew to her belly. "Is he all right?" The baby gave a hard, reassuring kick in response. "Is my son going to be okay? His heart rate is up, but he's a tough kid, a fighter just like his mom." Dr. Evans gave her hand a squeeze, a gesture more comforting than any medication. "These little ones are stronger than we know. He's going to be fine. And so are you. I'll see to it." Her father stood like a sentry in the corner, unmoving since they'd checked in, his phone clutched in his hand. The door swung open and Chloe burst in. At 36, her blonde hair was a wreck, and she was in the wrinkled clothes she'd clearly been sleeping in when he'd called. Her laptop bag was slung over her arm, and her investigator's eyes instantly scanned and assessed the entire room. "I came as soon as I heard." Chloe set her bag down and grabbed Diana's other hand. "Your dad called me. Oh, Diana, I'm so sorry." "How could you know anything?" Diana's voice was a dry rasp. "It's already gone viral." Chloe's face hardened. "Anyone who matters in the Boston tech scene has seen it. It's everywhere." "What are you talking about?" Chloe glanced at their father, a silent, grim acknowledgement passing between them. She held up her phone. "A major tech journal posted their exclusive story 30 minutes ago, right as the gala was wrapping up." She turned the screen. It was a picture of Arthur and Isabel from the event. They stood before a display about his new AI platform, his arm wrapped possessively around Isabel's waist. Isabel was wearing a shimmering gold dress Diana knew was from her own closet. They both looked ecstatic. The headline blared, "A New Era in AI, led by the industry's ultimate power couple. Some partnerships are destined for greatness." It had thousands of reactions already. The comments were a torrent. "Congratulations, Arthur." "Finally. We all knew this was coming. She was never on your level." "Here's to a partner who can keep up." Diana knew the names: venture capitalists, board members, people she had hosted for dinner, all of them celebrating her complete erasure, as if 6 years of their life could be deleted with a single article. "He did this in public," she whispered, the words feeling like ash in her mouth. "They're all saying I was a liability." "Anyone who says that is a fool," Chloe said, her voice sharp and protective. "Diana, I need to ask you something vital, and you have to be completely honest. Don't cover for him." "What?" Chloe leaned closer, her tone urgent and low. "How long has Isabel been his lead developer?" 6 years. He brought her on right after our honeymoon." Diana's blood ran cold with a dawning, terrible understanding. "What are you implying?" "I started digging the moment your dad hung up," Chloe said, flipping open her laptop. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, bringing up encrypted folders and financial records. "My PI credentials get me into places, and I know people. I find patterns in the data, Diana. That's what I do." "Chloe, what is this?" Chloe paused her frantic typing. She took a slow breath, her eyes turning hard with a rage Diana had never witnessed before. "This wasn't a recent thing, Diana. This started years before he even put a ring on your finger." The room tilted, and Diana clutched the steel bed rail to keep from falling. "That's not possible. We were so in love. He took me to a private island for my birthday. His digital footprint tells a much different story." Chloe angled the laptop toward her. "Arthur and Isabel were together while you were planning a wedding. While you were choosing flower arrangements, they were laughing at you." She enlarged an email chain, the words searing themselves into Diana's memory. From Arthur Vance to Isabel Laurent. An unread message from Clara, June 10th, 2023. 7 months before he proposed. "See you tonight, can't wait. Amelia thinks I'm at a development summit. Her obliviousness is tragic. And relax about the marriage, it's a means to an end. Her family's influence gets us the zoning approvals. After that, we're golden. Just be patient, you're the one, always have been. J." Amelia stared at the screen. Each word shattered her world. A means to an end. She was just leverage. "It's worse," Sarah said softly. "Far worse." She pulled up bank statements and LLC filings. "You know that real estate trust your grandfather set up?" "Of course. $50 million in prime city properties. A legacy from a San Francisco legend. It was her foundation." "It's in a bulletproof trust," Amelia said, her voice hollow. "Julian can't touch it. He found a way around it." Sarah showed another document. 6 months after the wedding, you granted him power of attorney. He said it was for permits on a new waterfront project." The moment flooded back. Julian's easy smile, his casual dismissal. "Just initial here, love. It's all legal boilerplate. I'll handle it." She'd signed without reading. He was her husband, the man she loved, as he methodically stole her birthright. "How much?" Amelia's voice was barely a whisper. "How much is gone?" 30 million. The number suffocated the room. "He moved your entire inheritance into a shell corporation. That company then became the sole buyer for Sterling Developments." "He didn't build an empire," Amelia choked out, the awful truth collapsing on her. "I did. My family's money built it." "Every brick was yours," Sarah confirmed. "You didn't marry a visionary developer, Amelia. You funded him. Every award, every groundbreaking, every dollar of profit was built on the stolen 30 million. The baby kicked, a sharp protest. "There's one last thing," Sarah said, her voice tight. "I found it in his business insurance filings. I almost didn't tell you." "Tell me," Amelia commanded, her voice turning to ice. "Tell me everything." Julian took out a $5 million key person policy on you 2 months ago, and he is the only beneficiary. A cold wave crashed over Amelia. I never approved any insurance policy. Your signature is on the document, a very good forgery. Sarah met her gaze. Amelia, he wasn't just stealing your money. He was planning for you to have a fatal accident. A fatal accident during a high-risk pregnancy. The bedside monitor blared, its rhythm chaotic. The baby twisted inside her. Dr. Chen appeared, her face alarmed. What is going on? Her blood pressure is critical. We need a moment, Marcus commanded. Just a single minute, please. The doctor hesitated, then nodded and left. Amelia's gaze shot from her father to Sarah, then to the tablet screen. The brake failure on the Presidio Hills last month hadn't been an accident. He was trying to kill her, hoping the crash would solve his problems. He wanted to collect $5 million as Clara moved into her life. The man she loved, the father of her child, was plotting her death while she designed their baby's room. I will ruin him. The thought was glacial. A voice forged in betrayal's fire. I will take back everything. Every property, every share, every piece of the company built with my family's name. He will be left with nothing. Good. Marcus Sterling stood beside her, his hand covering hers, with the strength of a man who built an empire. Because we are all going to help you. Every one of us. Absolutely. Sarah closed the laptop, her expression furious. When we are through with Julian Vaughn, he will be destroyed. I promise you that. Amelia looked at them, her father, her closest friend. They had come without question, armed with fierce loyalty and a desire to help her fight. She wasn't alone. She never had been. Julian tried to make her feel small, but she had her own circle, people who loved her for herself, not her net worth. Together, they would dismantle Julian Vaughn's world. 2 weeks had passed since that night. 14 days of strategy, of healing, of watching her old life burn to embers and planning the new one. Amelia was back in her father's Pacific Heights mansion, in her old room overlooking the Golden Gate, where she once dreamed. It was now a war room. The walls were covered in diagrams, shell companies circled in red, fraudulent deeds traced in blue. It was a map of Julian's lies, every stolen dollar tracked. The nursery was 2 doors down, already finished. Her father had the walls painted a pale blue, the color Amelia had picked for the home she now lost. He had the crib built, a mobile of stars hanging over it, and a rocking chair by the window. Marcus Sterling wasn't a man of many words, but the room was his silent vow to give his grandchild a safe home. This morning, the war room was electric with purpose. Sarah was at a desk, flanked by screens. Miss Reed, their lawyer, sat opposite her, a legal pad full of notes. Marcus stood near the window, and Amelia sat at the center of it all, 36 weeks pregnant, listening as Miss Reed outlined their first move against Julian. Take me through it one more time, Miss Reed said, from the top. I need every last detail of his fraud. Amelia had told the story so often the anguish had hardened into cold purpose, the deliberate deception, the grand theft, the erosion of her identity. I met Julian 7 years ago at a fundraiser for the SF MoMA. I was representing my family's foundation. He was there to hunt for wealthy patrons. She paused, letting the predatory truth of it settle in the air. He was handsome, brilliant, and wore a perfect suit. He claimed he was launching a visionary real estate firm that would reshape the city. He just needed the right initial backer. And you were that backer? Miss Reed's question was direct. I didn't understand the full scope of my own finances then. I knew about the trust, but the details were abstract. He presented himself as a self-made man who would never ask a woman for a dime. He was broke. Sarah put a document on the screen. His net worth when you met was negative $60,000. He had defaulted on loans and maxed out every card. He was desperate, Amelia. A con man in a $1,000 suit. He manipulated me perfectly. Amelia's voice was empty, her pain solidifying into steel. He proposed a year later. We were married the following spring. A huge wedding at Grace Cathedral. My father covered it all because Julian said he was putting every cent into our future. Our PI found he was already seeing Clara by then, Sarah added. The messages started 6 months before the wedding. The power of attorney, her lawyer said. Tell me precisely how he got you to sign that. 3 months after the wedding, we were finalizing the Mission Bay development. The one I lost, Amelia said, closing her eyes for a moment. I remember Julian bringing home a mountain of paperwork. He said the property law was incredibly complicated. He told me he could manage everything if I would just sign some authorization forms. Did he explain the documents to you? No. He waved it off as standard procedure, telling me to leave the boring details to him. Amelia looked directly at her lawyer. I help run my family's real estate portfolio, Miss Reed. I should have read every word. But I loved him and I was naive. I got swept up and just signed. He counted on that. Miss Reed's voice was professional but not unsympathetic. Men like Julian are predators. They weaponize the trust of others. He leveraged your trust, Ben, their litigator explained. Your entire family trust, the Sterling Fund, your private accounts. 2 weeks after you signed, $20 million was wired to Vaughn Properties. Vaughn, Miss Reed scoffed. He named the entire fraud after himself, a monument to his own arrogance built with my inheritance. Ben gave a slight smile. That level of ego is how we catch them. They can't resist signing their work. What did he do with the money? Marcus's voice was low, his first words. Sarah displayed new diagrams. Vaughn Properties acquired a block of foreclosed industrial warehouses. He bought it for nothing, used our family's political capital to get it rezoned for luxury condos, and sold the land 18 months later for a $60 million profit. So he gambled, Marcus clarified, with my daughter's inheritance. He built a dynasty. For the next 7 years, he repeated that same move. Every acquisition was funded by that initial $20 million. Every profit was rolled into a larger project. As of last month, Vaughn Properties controlled a portfolio of developments valued at over $150 million. $150 million, all grown from the Sterling legacy. A trust created to protect her, not finance the life of the man who planned to erase her. And that's not all, Sophie said quietly. For the last 5 years, Julian was also funneling money from your shared investment accounts. Tiny wire transfers initially, then huge sums. Another $7 million was moved into a shell corporation he controlled, disguised as seed funding. $19 million all told. Clara did the mental arithmetic. He stole $19 million from me. That's what we've been able to track, Sophie confirmed. There could be offshore accounts we haven't found. Alex set his pen down, his focus entirely on Clara. In California, community property is divided 50-50. Julian will claim these were high-risk investments and that you are only entitled to half of what's left. But they weren't investments, Clara stated, her voice cold as ice. It was theft. My money, precisely. Alex's smile was sharp, the kind that backed up his reputation. We are not negotiating a divorce settlement. We are pursuing felony fraud, and the solution for that is not a 50-50 split, it's full restitution. You're saying she gets it all back? Marcus asked, stepping closer. Every single dollar? I'm saying she has a claim to every cent, plus damages, compensation for emotional duress, and punitive awards for the scale of his deception. Alex picked up his notepad. Julian Vance didn't just cheat on his wife. He orchestrated several major financial crimes: grand theft, forgery, and wire fraud. The power of attorney. Clara's hand went to her belly, where she felt a faint flutter. That document, Alex confirmed. You never approved the liquidation of your inheritance portfolio. He forged your e-signature, a federal offense. And given he was abandoning you in the middle of a complicated pregnancy, we will argue he acted with extreme indifference to your physical and emotional safety. A heavy silence filled the art gallery. What's our plan? Marcus demanded. How do we hold him accountable for this? We need the transaction logs. wire receipts, brokerage statements, and corporation papers, which Sophie has already pulled together. Alex nodded towards the laptop. We will also need an expert witness, a digital forensics specialist for the signature, and an accountant to trace the money. I can handle that, Sophie said. I know people. We need someone from the inside, a person at his venture capital firm who can corroborate the scheme. Who knew about the fraud? Who can speak to his state of mind? David Miller, Marcus said the name. All eyes turned to him. Julian's co-founding partner. He was forced out last month. He knows where all the skeletons are. How do you know? Clara asked. He called me last week. Said his guilt has been eating him up for years. He's ready to talk. Marcus's jaw tightened. I told him to lay low, that we would reach out when we were ready. Alex made a note. Let's schedule a meeting. With his testimony, our position becomes unbreakable. Clara stood up and walked to the gallery window, looking out over the San Francisco Bay, where the fog rolled in under the Golden Gate Bridge. She thought of her grandfather, a man who built a real estate empire from nothing, who had weathered recessions and hostile rivals to ensure his family was always secure. He'd tripled their net worth and gave it to Clara with a single piece of advice. Build your own fortress, sweetheart. Never let a man decide your worth. Julian had tried to liquidate hers. He decided she was worth nothing. A signature on a screen, a source of capital, an elegant accessory. But her grandfather had nurtured a strength in Clara that she had almost let herself forget. The quick mind, the fierce determination, the instinct to dominate. I want it all, Clara said, her voice cutting the silence. Every limited partnership, every portfolio company, every single carried interest point. I want his firm. I want the Napa estate. He can leave with his clothes and nothing else. That is an aggressive stance, Alex noted. Is it possible? Alex tapped his pen. Based on this evidence, yes, but it will be a vicious battle. Julian is a big name in Silicon Valley. He's got a pack of ruthless corporate lawyers. He used my name. Our family's attorneys are loyal to us. My connections open those doors for him, Clara retorted, turning back from the window. Everything he has, he built, using my family's capital. I am not demanding anything that isn't mine by right. I am simply reclaiming it. Then we prepare for war, Alex said, rising to gather his files. We file everything in 3 days. The divorce petition, the civil suit for investment fraud, and a confidential tip to the SEC. We'll attack from every angle. By the time he realizes what is happening, his assets will be frozen. And Isabel, he added, will be named as a party to the conspiracy. She knowingly benefited from the fraud. She'll face the music right next to him. Clara nodded, a cold resolve washing over her, a clarity she hadn't felt since before the wedding, before Julian, before she made herself smaller to fit his world. She was finished being the supportive partner, finished staying silent, finished being the woman Julian Vance thought he owned. She was Clara Reed, granddaughter of a tycoon, sister of Marcus, and soon mother to an heir who would inherit their fight. And she was about to take back every single thing that was stolen from her. David Miller arrived at Marcus Reed's Presidio Heights mansion at 2 p.m. He drove a black Tesla, wore a trendy tech bro vest, and carried himself like a man used to boardroom pitches and demo days, but his hands shook when he rang the doorbell, and when Clara looked at him, she recognized it instantly. Guilt. The kind that poisons every success and makes rest impossible. The kind that turns every quiet moment into a desperate prelude to a confession. They met in the study. Alex sat at one side of a large oak desk, his notepad ready. Sophie was on her laptop, prepared to verify every claim. Marcus stood near the bay window, arms folded, observing with the sharp intensity of a man who had seen his share of betrayals. David sat stiffly on the edge of a couch, unable to get comfortable, adjusting his sleeves, his gaze avoiding Clara's. "Thank you for seeing me." His voice was strained. "I know I have no standing to ask for your time." "You're right," Clara said. "You don't. So start explaining why you are here." David swallowed hard, his Adam's apple moving. When he spoke, the story came rushing out. "I was at the office late the night he did it. Julian told me we needed to review the pitch deck for a new fund. We were supposed to be finalizing our capital call strategy, but it was a pretext. We were in his office when I saw an alert from your brokerage account. Then I heard Isabel's voice on a call with him, laughing. I went into the main office and I saw them together. He stopped, closing his eyes against the image. I saw him transfer your inheritance into the new shell company, watched him revoke your access to the family office portal, and remove your name from the vineyard deed. I saw Isabel walk out of his office glowing like she just closed $1 billion deal. And you did nothing. It was a fact, not a query. I did nothing. David's voice was hollow. I stood there and watched him systematically erase you from the life your family paid for, and I kept my mouth shut. No warning, no anonymous tip. I just let him betray his pregnant wife. Why? Clara demanded. Why didn't you do anything? I was a coward. David finally looked at her, his eyes full of self-loathing. I knew what Julian did to people who crossed him. I'd watched him ruin careers and bankrupt rivals. I even helped him do it. The manipulated valuations, the shell entities, the hidden liabilities. I knew how he operated. I was afraid that if I stood up to him, he would destroy me too. A thick silence settled in the study. Sophie was typing furiously. Alex made another note, his face a mask of predatory calm. He looked like a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. You said you could help. Alex's voice broke the silence. What kind of help are you offering? David opened his briefcase and pulled out a small, encrypted hard drive. His fingers were tense against the cool metal casing. It's everything. The inflated company valuations he showed to the investors, the fake quarterly statements, the network of offshore companies he used to hide your family's seed money. I have a record of every single fraudulent transaction. But why? Clara asked, her voice strained. Why would you keep records of your partner's crimes? Because I knew my time as his partner was almost over, David said, his face grim. Julian uses people up. He did it to their first partner, buying him out for nothing right before their biggest investment went public. He stole strategies from junior partners and then crushed them with legal threats. You saw all that, and you still worked with him. I did. The money was intoxicating. I was afraid. It's easy to look the other way when it is not your career on the chopping block. David met her eyes. Then I saw the announcement about the baby, and it suddenly wasn't just business anymore. Her sister, Sophie, plugged the drive into her laptop. The monitor lit up with nested folders. This is his entire financial history, she breathed. He has absolutely everything. 5 years of offshore accounts, server backups, transaction logs, the real ones beside the fakes. It is all there. There is more, Ethan said, pulling a file from his briefcase. This is the amended development pact. Liam had me witness it. He said you signed it at the lake house, claiming you were too exhausted with the pregnancy to drive to the city. I have never seen this document. Eleanor's voice was a razor. I know. The forgery is not even good. Liam got sloppy. Ethan pushed the paper across the table. This demonstrates he faked your signature to gain sole control over your family's investment shares. This is wire fraud, showing a clear intent to deceive. Mr. Sterling took the document, his spectacles resting on his nose. A sharp, cold smile formed on his lips. Mr. Vance, you realize the immense leverage you have just handed us. I am serving you Liam's entire corrupt enterprise on a silver platter, Ethan declared, getting to his feet, including my full testimony. Whatever you require, I will provide. So, why come forward now? Sterling's voice was a low rumble. You have held this information for years. You could have brought him down at any time. Why today? Ethan turned away, gazing at the Chicago skyline. When he finally answered, his voice was tight. I have a younger sister. She is 23. She just graduated from Northwestern Law. She admires me, believes I am this brilliant, principled man. I watched Liam conspire to steal from his own unborn child and stayed silent. If my sister ever discovered the kind of man I have been, I could never look her in the eye again. So this is about your conscience. Eleanor's tone was flat. Not about justice for me. Perhaps? Does my motive really matter? Ethan shrugged. The result is the same. You receive the evidence to destroy Liam. I get to become someone my sister would not despise. We all benefit, except for Liam. He will receive exactly what he has earned. Ethan grabbed his coat. I will be your witness. I will go to the district attorney with everything. I will do whatever is necessary to fix this. But I need something in exchange. Immunity. Sterling had been anticipating this. For all the devastation this will unleash, you want to remain untouched. Yes, but I am not seeking forgiveness. I understand my part in this, but I cannot be your key witness from a cell block next to Liam's. Sterling glanced at Eleanor, leaving the decision to her. She looked at Ethan, a man who had attended their charity events, praised her architectural work, all while knowing her husband was draining her inheritance and sleeping with their interior designer. He was worth less than nothing. He did not merit a single moment of her thought, but he was an instrument, and an instrument was what she required. Immunity, Eleanor's voice was frigid, is contingent. It relies on your full and truthful cooperation. If you omit one single detail or twist the truth to shield Liam in any way, our agreement is nullified. Understood? Now leave. Our legal team will reach out. Ethan nodded, walked to the door, then hesitated. For what it is worth, I am deeply sorry. I should have told you. I should have done something other than just watch. He paused. I hope you take everything from him. I hope you force him to pay for every single lie. And I hope his son grows up knowing his mother was the strongest woman in all of Chicago. He was gone. The door clicked. Chloe looked up from the laptop, her expression grimly victorious. We have him. We have it all. Between Ethan's files and our own investigation, we can prove wire fraud, embezzlement, everything. Liam is not just losing his development company. He is facing federal time. Sterling was already making a call. I am contacting the U.S. Attorney's Office. This goes far beyond a civil matter. It is criminal. Eleanor's father, Robert, sat next to her, his arm protectively around her. How are you doing? Only last month, she had broken down in her walk-in closet, convinced she had lost everything. Her husband, her home, her faith in her own judgment. Now, she held the means to annihilate the man who had tried to cast her aside. Documents, testimony, and evidence that would burn down the empire Liam built with her family's reputation and her own broken heart. It did not feel like a win, not at all. It felt like the opening salvo in a long and vicious war. A war she would fight at 8 months pregnant while grieving a marriage and questioning every decision she had ever made. I feel broken, she confessed, and furious and scared and incredibly sad. You have every right to feel all of it, Robert said, his grip tightening. Feel all of it, but do not let it stop you. It will not. Eleanor placed a hand on her belly. The baby answered with a firm, solid kick, a powerful kick, the kick of a survivor. Because this is not just about me anymore. It is about him, for the life he deserves, with the mother he will have. She went to a large blueprint table where a timeline of Liam's deception was laid out like her own personal chronicle of failure. 12 years, 4,383 days given to a fraud, a man who never cared for her, creating a life built on an utter lie. But she was not that person anymore. The girl who trusted blindly and signed documents without reading them. That girl was gone. The woman who remained was colder, harder, and had a singular purpose. Liam had forged his own enemy, and now she was coming for him. 3 a.m. The house was deathly quiet. The baby was motionless. Eleanor sat in the gloom of her father's study. A mug of herbal tea turned cold beside her. The window reflected only the dark night and her own weary, pale face. She had not slept properly in weeks. Her son was usually a tempest at this hour, a tiny acrobat practicing his moves. But tonight there was a terrifying quiet. just a deep silence where her son's movements should have been. "Hello in there?" Eleanor pressed a hand to her stomach, a dart of fear cutting through her exhaustion. "Please move. Just one little kick for Mommy." The seconds stretched on. Silence. Then a flicker, a small heel pushing against her side, a slow turn that pressed into her ribs. "There you are," Eleanor whispered, relief washing over her. "There you are, my sweet boy." Thank God. She lifted the mug and sipped. The tea was cold, but it was grounding. Sleep felt impossible. When she shut her eyes, she saw Liam's face. The cool indifference in his eyes, the patronizing smirk, the way he treated her like a problem to be managed. 12 years. An entire decade of her life, her whole inheritance, the fundamental belief that they were a team, all of it, a sham. She believed they were building a future, a dynasty, but she was merely a mark in his extended con. Every single day. From their first meeting at that Chicago charity gala, it had been a targeted deception, and she had been the prey. She opened her laptop and accessed their shared drive. Chloe had warned her to stop, that it was a kind of self-harm. But she needed to see it one more time. The unraveling started with an email titled Aspen Itinerary, accidentally forwarded by a travel agent to her instead of Liam's assistant. From that, she found it all. It was not just a flight confirmation, but a detailed plan for a trip to a private Aspen resort he claimed was for a solo investor meeting. The file showed him on a ski lift with Maya. The Cartier watch he had purchased with Eleanor's trust money was on Maya's wrist. They were staying in the exact suite he had told Eleanor was a future investment for our family. A note on the reservation was a knife to her heart. Asterisk anniversary package for Mr. and Mrs. Vance. Surprise for my wife. A post from Maya showed up on her feed. 112 likes. The comments below it were a fresh wound. Asterisk, so thrilled you are finally getting your happiness. Asterisk, about time. We always knew she was the right one for him. Asterisk, Eleanor was always so serious. Asterisk, to your new chapter. Eleanor clicked through the profiles. Women who had praised her restoration of their historic home, who had sipped her expensive wine, who had told her how perfect she and Liam were. They were all applauding her obsolescence, as if a 12-year marriage was a small detail that had now been tidied up. Her pain was an afterthought. Her whole life with him, dismissed. The truth hit her with the force of a physical blow. Asterisk. He was manipulating my reality. For years, every worry she had was reframed as her being overly anxious or jealous. It all made sense now. The late-night site visits that went until dawn, the mysterious cash transfers he called capital for new ventures, the faint smell of a tuberose perfume that she never wore. He would just smile, call her neurotic, his calm certainty making her question her own sanity. Asterisk, I knew, Eleanor whispered, her hand on her belly. She spoke to her unborn child and to herself. Asterisk, I always felt it, but I let his excuses quiet my own instincts. I believed his words over my own feelings. That was the ultimate betrayal, not the other woman, not the stolen money. The deepest wound was her own participation in the lie. She had surrendered her intuition for his version of events, making herself smaller to exist in the world he had invented. The baby kicked, a sharp jab to her ribs. Asterisk, I know, my love. Mommy made a terrible mistake. Eleanor wiped a tear from her cheek. Asterisk, but that is over now. From now on, my gut is my compass. No one will ever make me doubt what I know to be true again. A floorboard creaked behind her. Her father stood in the doorway, his silver hair unkempt from a sleepless night. The first light etched worry lines beside his brow. Sophia? He left the room dark, respecting the shadows she hid in, and settled beside her. When did you wake up? Hours ago. My mind won't shut off. I know that feeling. He found her hand, his own worn from a lifetime of handling law books. It was a firm, reassuring anchor. What's going on in that head of yours? I keep wondering what I could have done differently. You did everything right. then why does it feel like my mistake? The question echoed in the stillness, a raw confession of her deepest fear. Because that's precisely how he needs you to feel. Antonio's tone was sharp as a verdict. Men like Marcus don't just steal your money, they dismantle your reality. They twist things until you doubt your own memories. You begin to think every failure is your own. How could you know? Because I watched your mother go through the exact same thing. Antonio's gaze fixed on a distant memory. Her first husband. The one whose name we never say. He was just like Marcus. Charming, ambitious, and made her feel like the only woman on earth. Then he spent the following years taking her apart, piece by painful piece. He claimed she was too sensitive, that her instincts were wrong, that her needs were a burden. Sophia stared at her father, shocked. He'd never mentioned her mother had a life before him. How did she get out? She almost didn't. He convinced her she was nothing without him, that no one else would ever love her. Antonio's grip tightened on her hand. But then she found out you were coming. That changed everything. She refused to let a daughter watch her mother fade away. She left for you. She did it for the woman she was meant to become and the child she wanted to raise. Antonio squeezed her hand gently. And that is what you are doing now. You are fighting for your son. You are protecting his future by taking back your own. Sophia looked down at her belly, where the reason for this war was stirring. I just feel so lost, Papa. I spent 7 years as Marcus's wife, designing interiors for his buildings, hosting his investors, smoothing my own personality to fit his world. She met his eyes. I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know who Sophia Rossi is. You are about to meet her. Antonio's voice was firm. It's not instant, but you will find her. And one day, you'll realize him leaving was the greatest gift he could have given you. The woman you are becoming is stronger than the one he tried to erase. How can you be so sure? Because I have known you for 32 years. I know what you're made of. You are, without a doubt, your mother's daughter. He stood and kissed her forehead. Now get some rest. You have a fight ahead. I can't. When I close my eyes, I just see his face. I know, but you must. For your son. He needs his mother strong. Sophia let him guide her from the couch to the sanctuary of her old bedroom. He tucked the blankets around her as if she were small again. The monsters had just changed, now wearing bespoke suits and wielding a destructive charm. Their empires were built on smoke and mirrors. But her father was real. Her sister Isabella and her lawyer Evelyn were real. She was not isolated, no matter how hard Marcus had tried. That was his biggest lie. She had her army. And this wasn't about surviving. It was about winning. The air in Evelyn Reed's law office felt charged. Through the window, the San Francisco skyline stood witness to the group in the conference room. Sophia sat at the table's head, 37 weeks pregnant. Her son kicked, a tiny warrior preparing for his own battle. This was her command center. Evelyn was on her right, her eyes sharp as she scanned a legal document. On her left, her sister Isabella had spreadsheets open, showing a tangle of financial transactions. Across from them was Leo Martinez, a former project manager at Marcus's company, looking anxious. Her father, Antonio Rossi, stood by the window, a quiet, solid presence. There was one other person. A woman named Jenna Morales sat next to Leo. She was 29, her face set, holding a forgotten cup of coffee. She was Marcus's former assistant, let go for being too smart and intimidated into staying quiet. He had replaced her with an influencer more concerned with yacht parties than profit margins. All right, everyone, Evelyn started, her voice cutting through the tension. We file in 48 hours. One last pass. The money is easy to follow, Isabella said, pointing at a screen. I've tracked $20 million from Sophia's trust, funneled into a shell corporation for a Dubai high-rise just months after he got her to sign the asset management agreement. I can link every dollar to fake contractor invoices and non-existent material orders. I can prove Marcus Thorne's entire international development branch was funded with her family's money. And the forged loan guarantees? Evelyn asked. 2 digital forensic specialists are ready. They've analyzed the metadata on the key contracts, especially the one for the latest construction loan. The conclusion is simple. Those are not Sophia's digital signatures. They are expert forgeries cloned from a valid document. Evelyn nodded. Leo, are you prepared to testify about the fraudulent projections at Thorne Development? Yes. Leo's voice was low but firm. I can confirm Marcus knew the occupancy projections were impossible. I was in the room when he outlined the strategy to inflate the pre-lease numbers for investors. I have the server backups. He instructed me to generate the false reports. I filed the final papers. Marcus said Sophia had approved it while they were in Monaco. He was so casual about it. Leo shook his head. I knew it was dirty, but I was afraid of what he would do to my career. Your testimony establishes his intent. Evelyn then turned to Jenna, which leads to you. I think you have the final piece we need. Jenna took a deep breath. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. I was Marcus's assistant for 3 years before he brought in the new girl. I saw it all. I saw him launch the Dubai project with Sophia's trust fund. I watched him deceive partners, threaten contractors, and cook the books like it was a game. Why didn't I say something? I was young, in debt, and scared. Marcus always made sure people knew what happened to those who crossed him. Sophia's hands tightened into fists. But the biggest problem was, I had no physical proof. I knew the whole operation was a lie, but I couldn't prove it. So what changed? I got prepared. Jenna slid a small, encrypted drive across the polished table. After my first year, I started backing everything up. I forwarded emails to a secret account, made audio recordings of his calls, and took screenshots of financial models before they were altered. I always had a feeling that one day, someone would finally stand up to Marcus. I wanted to be ready. She nudged the drive toward Evelyn. It's all on there. 3 years of his schemes, including a specific call I think you need to hear. Evelyn plugged the drive into her laptop, located the file, and pressed play. Marcus's voice, confident and smooth, filled the silent room. The sound of a man who believed he was untouchable. Jenna, I need the Q3 projections tweaked for the new investor deck. The pre-lease numbers are soft, but I need them to show a 40% jump. Jenna's recorded voice was audible, nervous but clear. But Mr. Thorne, that's not factual. It's aspirational, Jenna. That's how you build things. Don't get bogged down in details. Just make the presentation look solid for the meeting. A short pause followed. Then he added one last thing. And keep this between us. Don't bother my wife with it. She has a wonderful eye for design. But she doesn't have the mind for high-stakes finance. She probably thinks a cap rate is a type of hat. The recording ended. There are dozens more just like it, Jenna said softly. Discussions about shell companies, instructions to change data, and plans to hide losses from everyone, most of all Sophia. He talked about her like she was a naive child, a decorative asset to be managed and shielded from the real work, too delicate to understand his business world. Sophia felt each condescending word like a fresh cut. It confirmed her worst fear. Marcus never considered her his equal. She was just his startup capital and a pretty face for his brand. But there is one more thing, her lawyer Evelyn said quietly. It's a text message chain from 2 weeks ago, the day before he told her he was leaving. She slid a printed copy onto the table. This time Marcus's typed words were there, along with his partner Ava's. This pregnancy is becoming a real drag on our cash flow, Ava texted, her words sharp. Her nesting phase and all this baby spending is tying up our capital. It's being managed. Marcus's response was cold, as if discussing a market downturn. These high-stress situations can be volatile, and if some unfortunate event were to happen, well, that's what the family's life insurance policy is for. You really think she might have a complication? I think finding out her husband gambled her entire inheritance would be a significant shock to her system. Marcus sent a final, chilling text. Can you imagine? The incredible stress would be massive. All that pressure, the company's exposure, the public scandal. A person can only take so much. If not, we have other ways. The timing is critical. The policy is airtight. The divorce papers are drafted dot model. Once her signature is on the power of attorney, we can liquidate the entire portfolio. The file was saved on their shared server. The conference room was deathly quiet. Elena instinctively cradled her stomach, feeling the soft kick of her daughter. They were planning to declare me unstable. Her voice was a monotone, hollowed out. They wanted to use my pregnancy to prove I was unfit, seize my assets, and build their new life while I was locked away. This is textbook coercive control and conspiracy to commit fraud, Marcus's voice cut through the air. Julian Vance is no longer just a defendant in a divorce proceeding. He is now facing a slate of felony charges. The Securities and Exchange Commission is going to be very interested in his off-the-books venture capital. When do we file? Her father's voice was taut, the question of a man who'd seen his daughter betrayed. First thing tomorrow, Marcus said, organizing a stack of documents. I've already prepared the brief for the SEC and the DA's white-collar crime division. We'll file the civil injunction and the criminal complaints at the same time. By tomorrow afternoon, every single asset tied to Julian Vance will be frozen. And Chloe, who is clearly documented as a co-conspirator, she is facing the exact same criminal and civil liabilities. Those email chains make it impossible for her to claim she was unaware of Julian's criminal intentions. Elena looked at the small team she'd assembled, at the mountain of digital proof, at the legal storm they were about to unleash. Just last week, he had changed the locks on their home, drained their joint accounts, and left her thinking she was ruined. Now she had the power to dismantle the man who tried to throw her away, but it didn't feel like a victory. Not yet. Victory would be seeing Julian's face when he realized his pregnant wife, the coder he'd dismissed as a has-been, was the architect of his complete and utter ruin. She addressed her small war council. Thank you for all of this. I know this was a huge risk. Some of you put your careers on the line. Others had to face old wounds. Some of you have carried this secret for far too long. Her eyes met Mr. Chen's, their former head of accounting. But you showed up for me. When I had lost everything, you were all here for me, and I will never be able to repay you. Mr. Chen nodded grimly. You are doing what I was always too cowardly to do. Take him down, Elena. Make him pay for everything. Show every person he ever wronged that justice isn't just a word. It's an inevitability. Because men like Julian think the rules don't apply to them. They believe their charisma and their connections make them invincible. But they always make one fatal mistake. They betray someone who refuses to be erased, someone who is willing to burn down their own life just to watch his kingdom turn to ash. She looked at Marcus. File the documents, freeze his accounts, notify the authorities. Her voice was like forged steel, hardened by betrayal. It's time to take back everything he stole from my family. The story hit the San Francisco Chronicle's tech blog at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. By 10, it was the top headline on every news site. Tech CEO accused of massive investment fraud. Wife alleges husband used her trust to build company. Pregnant spouse files suit to seize corporate assets. Vance Innovations raided by federal agents. Elena followed the news from her father's Pacific Heights mansion, 38 weeks pregnant, feeling the first subtle tightening of a contraction. The timing was a disaster. Or perhaps it was destiny. Her daughter would be born into a world where her mother had already won her first war. The news anchor was speaking with barely concealed glee. It was the perfect scandal for the modern era. The brilliant coder, the predatory husband, the stolen trust fund, and the epic corporate takedown. The article laid out a vicious story. $20 million siphoned from a family trust, 30 counts of wire fraud, falsified shareholder reports, and an email exchange implying a conspiracy to have her declared mentally incompetent. Julian's photo filled the screen, a candid from a recent tech conference looking charismatic and untouchable. The reporter summed it all up. Julian Vance, the golden boy of Silicon Valley, is facing a litany of federal charges. His tech empire was allegedly built on capital stolen from his wife. The 38-year-old CEO is accused of laundering $20 million through a series of shell corporations to launch Vance Innovations, now valued at over $100 million. Elena's phone started buzzing. Julian. She ignored it. It buzzed again and again. Finally, she picked up. You have no idea what you have done. He was trying for menacing, but she could hear the panic underneath, the sound of a man losing a control he'd held for 38 years. Elena, we need to talk about this. This is all a huge misunderstanding. No, Julian, it is not. These allegations are insane. You are not thinking clearly. The pregnancy is making you emotional. If you'll just come to the office, I can show you the real investor reports. Elena's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. You mean the original reports from my father's security vault? The ones detailing the transfers from my trust account, the seed investments you made with my money, every fake quarterly statement you sent out? The line was silent. His breathing was ragged. I have Mr. Chen's sworn, notarized affidavit. He's already given a statement to the federal investigators. He's ready to testify about the doctored financials, the forged signatures, and the meetings where you showed him how to hide the money trail. Chen is a disgruntled old fool. I have your burner phone, Julian, Elena said, her voice flat and cold. 2 years of messages, including last week's thread where you and Chloe discussed how my emotional breakdown would be a very convenient, unfortunate event. If the stress of the company's restructuring caused a tragic complication with the baby, the absolute silence on the phone was all the confession she needed. She could almost picture his mind racing, looking for an exit that had vanished. What do you want? His voice was a whisper, the arrogance gone, replaced by the terror of a cornered animal. I already informed your board. I have informed my lawyers. I want it all back. Elena walked to the window overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge. The company, the patents, the stock options, this penthouse apartment, every single asset you acquired with my family's fortune, which, Julian, is everything. That's absurd. You can't seriously think I will just hand over. I also want a full, public apology and confession written by my legal counsel. You will admit to wire fraud, conspiracy, and securities fraud. You will state for the record that Vance Innovations was founded entirely with stolen money. You will apologize to me and to my family's name. I will ruin you in court. Julian's voice found a trace of its old poison. I will bury you in litigation for the next 10 years. I will bleed you dry on legal fees. You and that baby will walk away with absolutely nothing. Then the SEC gets the original account statements. Elena's voice was steady. This is a federal matter now, Julian. You won't be fighting me in a divorce court. You will be fighting the U.S. Department of Justice for the next 2 decades to avoid federal prison. She let him absorb that new reality, and I will leak the text messages to every tech blogger and journalist on the West Coast, the ones about my tragic complication. By tomorrow, you won't just be a disgraced CEO, you'll be a pariah. The man who schemed against his pregnant wife to steal her inheritance. You wouldn't dare. A long, painful silence. She heard him take a shaky breath. He was caught, and he knew it. Elena. His tone changed. A pathetic attempt at the charm he used to wield so effectively. Sweetheart, come on. Let's be adults about this. We can settle on a number. We can work this out. Give her what she wants. A controlling interest in the company, a ridiculous sum of cash. Just pay her to disappear. I'm not interested in a controlling interest. Elena's voice was glacial. I don't want your cash. I don't want a settlement. I want it all. And I want you to live every day for the rest of your life knowing that you are the one who gave me the shovel to dig your grave. She ended the call. Her heart rate was steady. A sense of calm focus washed over her, a feeling she hadn't had in years. This was the person she was before. The Stanford coder who graduated top of her class, the woman who could spot a fatal flaw in any system, the woman Julian had worked so hard for 5 years to make her forget. That woman was back, and this was just the beginning. The settlement conference was scheduled for 3 days later. Elena should have been on bed rest. She was 37 weeks pregnant. Her doctor had demanded zero stress, but this was a battle she needed to finish herself. She took her place at the head of the immense table, her lawyer Marcus at her side, her father standing behind them with a tablet computer. Julian sat at the far end, flanked by a trio of lawyers in $1,000 suits. He looked exhausted and gray. The prodigy of San Francisco's tech scene looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Chloe was nowhere in sight. She'd already retained her own counsel, cutting a plea deal to save herself. The first crack in the facade, Arthur began, his voice a low, steady blade. Mr. Sterling, perhaps you can clarify these invoices from the Rossi Gallery, funneling funds from your wife's family endowment into a private account. Liam's attorney stood abruptly. Regarding that matter, my client will be exercising his Fifth Amendment rights. Explain the $12 million laundered from that endowment into a shell corporation you control. The Fifth Amendment. Explain the 30 fraudulent material inspection reports you filed with the city. The Fifth Amendment. Explain the life insurance policy taken out on my client where her signature was digitally forged. Liam's confident smirk finally vanished. His legal team conferred in frantic whispers, but their options were gone. Arthur pressed on. Can you explain these recordings between you and Isabella Rossi, where you refer to your wife's pregnancy as a project delay? Where you discuss how a significant structural failure might be financially advantageous? Where you mention a $2 million insurance policy? Fifth Amendment? The words were barely audible. And for the first time in their marriage, Olivia saw genuine fear in Liam Sterling's eyes. Later, Olivia rode the silent elevator down with Arthur. Her back ached, and the baby was performing gymnastics against her ribs. Despite it all, she felt powerful, clear-headed, and in control for the first time in 5 years. Well, was that as cathartic as you'd hoped? Arthur asked, his tone softening. Olivia watched the polished brass numbers tick down. He thought he'd married a beautiful ornament, someone to host galas who would never check the architectural blueprints. The elevator chimed softly. He made a gross miscalculation. A catastrophic one. Arthur permitted himself a thin, satisfied smile. You always had claws, Olivia. He just convinced you they were decorative. The lobby was a frenzy of reporters. Camera flashes burst like fireworks. Olivia navigated the storm of shouted questions without a word, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. Mrs. Sterling, are you dissolving Sterling Designs, Miss Hayes? Will your husband be indicted? Olivia, do you regret marrying him? She never looked back, slipping into the town car as her father held the door, letting him drive her home. Alone in her old bedroom that night, surrounded by blueprints and bank statements, Olivia felt a dull pain radiate from her lower back. Just a warning, she told herself. Nothing to worry about. A second one followed, sharper this time. Then her water broke. Dad, she called out, her hands gripping the mahogany desk. Dad, it's time. The drive to the hospital was a blur of city lights. The contractions were coming faster now, the pain a rising tide. Her father's calm voice was her anchor. Her lawyer was already on the phone, alerting Olivia's private medical team. In the delivery suite, surrounded by focused professionals, Olivia had a single, unwavering thought. Her daughter. One final push, Olivia, her doctor encouraged. Dr. Anya Sharma's voice was a lifeline. You're almost there. You can do this. She thought of cold steel skyscrapers and patronizing smiles. She thought of the woman she had been and the woman she was now becoming. She pushed, and her daughter arrived with a fierce, healthy scream. 7 pounds, 3 ounces, utterly flawless, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would one day be the same hazel as her mother's and her grandmother's. Hello, my little masterpiece, Olivia whispered, her own cheeks wet with tears as she held her baby. Hello, Grace, named for her grandmother, a woman who had been a celebrated art critic and left a legacy of integrity. Grace Hayes, a name that stood for strength, a name that would never be stained by Sterling. She's perfect, her father said, his own eyes shining with pride, just like her mother. Olivia looked at her father. This man had moved heaven and earth for her. He had prepared her room and never once doubted her plan. "Thank you, Dad." The words were simple but carried the weight of everything. "For all of this, for believing in me. I always have, Liv, since the moment you were born." He leaned over to kiss her forehead. "And I always will." Grace made a small sound, her tiny fist gripping Olivia's hospital gown. "I made you a promise," Olivia murmured to her daughter. "The day I found out what he did, I swore I would build you a safe world, a life where no one could ever make you feel powerless." The baby slept on, completely safe. "A promise I will spend my life keeping. No matter what, you will always know your own strength, your own value, and that you are whole all on your own." Outside the windows of the New York City maternity ward, the dawn broke over the skyline. A new day, a new life, and Olivia was ready. 3 weeks after Grace's birth, Olivia watched Liam Sterling sign away his entire empire in a sterile conference room. She shouldn't have been there, still healing. But some moments demand a witness. Some demolitions must be observed. Grace slept soundly in a carrier beside her. The legal documents covered the mahogany table: stock transfers, asset forfeiture declarations, property deeds. Every motion of Liam's pen dismantled the architectural firm he'd built, using her family's reputation and his own web of lies. His hand trembled as he signed the first page, ceding full control of Sterling Designs to her. "Miss Hayes," her attorney announced, her voice crisp and final. "All assets are transferred as of this moment. Mr. Sterling retains zero equity, zero authority, and zero future claims." Liam's pen scratched noisily on the paper. "All capital diverted from the Hayes endowment will be repaid from his personal holdings plus interest," he signed. "A public statement drafted by my client, admitting to widespread construction fraud, will be released within 48 hours. Another signature." He looked hollowed out. The brilliant young architect now a ghost. Zero contact with Olivia Hayes or her daughter, Grace Hayes. Any violation will trigger the immediate refiling of federal racketeering charges. Liam hesitated. His lawyer whispered to him. He signed. Arthur collected the documents. "There is one final clause." Olivia's voice cut through the silence. "The Soho loft. My family's loft. I want it back." Liam's lawyer started to object. "Miss Hayes, that wasn't part of the settlement terms." "It's the final term," Arthur said, sliding one more page forward. "The property was acquired using funds laundered from Miss Hayes's inheritance. The transaction was fraudulent. Under New York law, the sale is void. The property reverts to my client." Liam stared at the paper, then at Olivia. "You're leaving me with absolutely nothing." "I'm reclaiming what was stolen," Olivia replied, her voice soft but firm. "Every brick of that firm was laid on my father's connections. My inheritance was the cornerstone. I'm not taking what you built, I'm collecting on your debt." Liam signed the last page. "One more thing," Olivia's voice stopped him. "Isabella. I want her out of the corporate apartment by tomorrow. She can take her handbag. The rest belongs to me." A flicker of something, not remorse but realization, crossed Liam's face, as if he was only just now seeing her. "You were always much smarter than I ever told anyone," he said, his voice low. "Yes, and you were always as corrupt as I feared." Olivia picked up Grace's carrier, stood, and looked down at the man she once loved. "Goodbye, Liam. I hope a federal penitentiary provides you ample time for reflection," she said, and then she turned and left without a second glance. Isabella Rossi's trial for conspiracy to commit fraud began 6 weeks later. The prosecution built an airtight case using evidence Olivia had uncovered, testimony from the firm's former project manager, and an undeniable paper trail of fake invoices. Olivia was there for every session. Her daughter Grace slept in a sling against her chest, a silent attendee. The courtroom was filled with reporters and angry investors demanding justice. Isabella looked diminished without her designer clothes. She looked like a fragile doll, broken by her own greed. Her legal team argued she was merely captivated by a charismatic mentor, a weak defense that crumbled under scrutiny. The prosecutor projected Isabella's own text messages, sharp and cruel, calling Olivia's pregnancy an inconvenient setback and mocking her taste in art. On the final day, Isabella's eyes met Olivia's across the courtroom. Olivia expected venom, but instead she saw a desperate, trapped animal. It was the look of someone whose luck had completely, and finally, run out. "Will the defendant please rise?" the jury foreman commanded. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of mail fraud, guilty. On all remaining counts, we find the defendant guilty." Isabella sagged, her lawyers catching her before she fell. From the gallery, a woman began to sob. The sentence was delivered weeks later. 6 years in a federal prison with a 4-year minimum. Olivia was not present. She was at home with Grace, sketching designs for a new public art initiative. Liam's trial was an even bigger circus. Federal investigators had uncovered a rot that ran far deeper than even Olivia's team had known. A decade of kickbacks and bribery that defrauded investors of millions. For 3 weeks, the prosecution presented a literal mountain of evidence. Liam's attorneys tried to paint him as a visionary artist who was simply careless with finances. The jury didn't buy it. Guilty on all 32 charges. During sentencing, the judge was merciless. He had reviewed every piece of evidence, including an art invoice for his mistress, which had been discovered by his 8 months pregnant wife. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, "you didn't just build with concrete and steel. You built an empire on lies. Julian Vance, your actions demonstrate a pattern of financial fraud and moral decay." The judge's words were sharp. "You betrayed your family. You conspired with an associate. You defrauded your investors. You dismissed your own child as a career liability." The judge paused. "This court sentences you to 10 years. Parole is possible in 7. Julian's legal team mumbled about an appeal. It was just noise. Elena heard the verdict from Marcus. She was in her new apartment, watching Sophia take her first wobbly steps. 10 years. Marcus's voice held a note of weary finality. He'll be nearly 50 if he gets out. Elena watched her daughter stumble, fall, and push herself back up. "How are you feeling?" Marcus asked. Elena took a moment. She thought she'd feel triumphant, a sense of justice for the man who tried to shatter her. But it wasn't that. First came a wave of pure relief, like a weight she hadn't known she carried was gone. Then, a quiet calm. And finally, something new. Freedom. Not just from him, but from the person she'd been. Free from needing his validation, from shrinking herself to fit his world. "I feel like it's over," she said, "and my own story can start." Sophia fell again and looked up at her mother. Elena simply smiled, opening her arms. "Come on, little chef. Try again, I'm right here." Sophia stood, took 3 shaky steps, and tumbled into her mother's embrace. "There you go. You did it." Outside, the Boston skyline glittered across the harbor. Life was moving on. For Elena, for Sophia, for the future they would cook up together, a year later. Elena stood in the dining room of what was once a failed tech incubator Julian had backed. The stark, minimalist branding was long gone. The sign now read Sterling. Her recipes, her philosophy, her belief in food with a story. The space was transformed. Cold concrete and glass had been replaced by reclaimed wood and a living wall of herbs. The art celebrated local farmers, not abstract corporate logos. Sophia, now 16 months old, held Elena's hand as she toddled around. "Elena," Marcus said, approaching with a tablet, "first quarter results are in. We're profitable. It's not venture capital money, but it's built on integrity." Elena smiled. "I'll take integrity over fraud any day. So will our diners." Marcus looked around the packed room. Our head sommelier told me this is the first place he's ever been truly proud to work for. Her own office was next to the kitchen. The community garden partnership is fully funded, her manager said, handing her a file, and we're starting the youth culinary program next month. Elena's eyebrow went up. At which location? Her manager grinned. The one Julian was going to use for that absurd food tech drone delivery hub? The one he bribed city officials for? I thought it was fitting. Elena opened the file. It showed a vibrant teaching kitchen for underserved teens. There were no executive suites. Instead, there were subsidized training stations, a public cafe, and a direct pipeline to local culinary schools, a space for the people who truly feed Boston. He would despise this, Elena said, feeling an immense sense of satisfaction. That's precisely the point. Her manager's voice grew serious. We're not just serving food, Elena. We're showing there's a better way to do business. That you don't have to be a shark to succeed. Sophia tugged on Elena's chef coat. Mama, up! Elena lifted her daughter. See this, sweet girl? Mama builds places that nourish people. Sophia pointed a small finger at a photo of a beautifully plated dessert. Yummy, she declared. Yes, darling. Lots of yummy food and classes and a safe place to create all the things that make a neighborhood feel like home. Her father, Marcus, arrived just then. He visited the restaurant often, not to interfere, but out of sheer pride. He brought cannolis from the North End and a small wooden whisk for Sophia. A new tool for your collection, he said. Sophia's face lit up. Whisk! She shouted and began to stir the air with great concentration. Her focus is incredible, Marcus said with a smile. She gets that from you. You are plating your own baby food at her age. Elena hardly remembered that time, just impressions of her mother's warmth and her father's steady encouragement. Your mother kept a recipe book for you, he said softly. She wrote down every dish you loved, every little kitchen victory. Marcus's voice was gentle. Your mother would have loved this place. Seeing you launch this restaurant, raising this wonderful girl. You're the chef she always knew you could be. I feel her in every recipe, Elena admitted, her gaze on Sophia. Now I finally get it. She meant the love for cooking her mother had sacrificed for her. The countless times she must have quieted her own culinary voice for Elena's future. The deep-seated fear of raising a daughter in a world that wasn't always fair. She understood that profound love and the life her mother wanted for her. One she had to build herself, Marcus spoke quietly. To design your own menu, to trust your own instincts with no one judging you or making you feel inadequate. You were in a golden prison for so long. Julian dictated your tastes. You allowed it, but you reclaimed them. Marcus reached out, his hand covering hers. That's what matters, Elena. Not what you lost, but what you've created from the ruins, and what you're building now. Sophia toddled over, climbing onto her grandfather's lap with her new wooden whisk. I cook. That's a fine whisk, my little sous chef. Does it have a name? Sophia considered, then declared, Fia Cook. Elena cherished the moment. Her father, who built a food distribution empire from scratch, her daughter, who would grow up knowing a woman could run her own kitchen, 2 generations of her family, bound by love, strength, and the drive to create, to feed, to thrive. She had lost so much in the past year. Her marriage, her financial security, her innocent belief that love was an impenetrable shield. But what she had built was far more precious than what was gone. She had her daughter, her restaurant, her own name, and the certainty that she could face any heat, handle any pressure, and overcome any challenge. Because she was Elena Sterling, Marcus's daughter, and mother to a Sophia who would carry their legacy, and her story was just beginning. It was the anniversary of the night her world imploded. Elena was awake before the sun. Sophia was sleeping soundly in her crib. The apartment was still a peaceful sanctuary. She lay in bed, absorbing the quiet, the security, and recalling 1 year ago. She had been choosing linens for a dinner party, planning a future that was a total fabrication. She had been Mrs. Julian Vance, the venture capitalist's wife, a woman who owned everything except what she truly wanted. Now she was Elena Sterling, a single mother, a chef, a survivor. The change was still jarring at times. The chasm between the woman she was and the woman she had become. She got out of bed, pulling on a simple chef's jacket, not the designer clothes she had long ago discarded, and went to the window. A gentle Boston rain was falling, the kind that settles in for the day. She didn't feel the sting of shame from that terrible night. Instead, a new feeling surprised her. Gratitude. His betrayal had cost her everything, but in losing it all, it had given her back to herself. She glanced into the nursery. Sophia was awake, holding the bars of her crib, chattering to a mobile of plush fruits. "Mama," her entire face brightened. "Mama here." Elena scooped her daughter into her arms, breathing in the sweet, comforting scent of her child. "Good morning, my sweet girl," Alara whispered against her belly. "Your father is closing a multi-million-dollar deal." She felt a hum of pure contentment. This life, a dream just 1 year ago, was now her reality. They were in their stunning San Francisco house as Marcus finalized a call. Alara was busy arranging the new smart nursery while fog drifted past their window. At 8 a.m., her sister Ava arrived with fresh pastries. Liam, Marcus's business partner, followed with an enormous gift basket. Then her mother-in-law appeared, carrying a handcrafted family quilt. "Happy housewarming," Ava said, embracing Alara. "And congrats on 1 year as the Bay Area's most talked about chef. The food critics are completely captivated by you," she added. "Good," Alara said with a confident smile. "They should be." They all sat on the floor sipping coffee as Alara worked on the crib. "I chatted with Marcus earlier," Ava said, glancing at her phone. "The last restaurant investor signed on, way ahead of schedule." "And the Michelin buzz?" Alara prompted. "We're fully booked for the next 6 months. Your menu is a masterpiece." Ava's voice swelled with pride for her sister. "You have built a culinary kingdom from the ground up, Alara. The restaurant was Alara's dream, a modern homage to her grandmother's traditional recipes. She wanted to serve a taste of heritage with an innovative flair. She named it the Ava Rose, for her sister, who was also her trusted sous chef, and for her daughter, who would be raised to know that a woman's passion could build empires, and for herself, the Alara who had always been waiting for this moment. "I couldn't have done any of this without you," Alara said, looking at Ava, who had critiqued every single dish, at Liam, who handled all her finances, and at Marcus, her husband, who had championed her vision from the very beginning. "You saw a design firm when I just saw sketches. You were my biggest investor when I was afraid to launch. You showed me what a true partner was." Liam entered, kissing her hair. "We build each other up," Chloe smiled, picking up the new smart home hub, ready to sync it. "Your turn, little guy. Let's get you connected." This was the final touch. She paired the device. The system asked her to review linked accounts. The Chicago fog had cleared. Sunlight filled the penthouse. A notification popped up on her tablet. A digital receipt from a jeweler. She smiled, tapping it. She told Liam everything about the new clients, the suppliers, and the baby, about her sister Sophie, who was so supportive, so involved in their success. "I wish she could find a love like ours," Chloe whispered. "She would have been thrilled for us." A notification chimed as the full credit card statement loaded. Her world froze. It wasn't a business expense. It was Liam with Sophie on a weekend in Aspen. Chloe scrolled wildly. Another charge, a 5-star hotel, a third, a private dinner. It was from last spring, right after her first trimester. This was a lie that unraveled her entire reality. It exposed the poison. It let her see the two people she adored for what they were. They schemed, they deceived, they shattered the beautiful life she believed was hers. She sat still, letting the cold truth settle in. Then she went back to the living room. That night, after their friends left, after Liam bragged about his startup's latest funding round, Chloe waited. Her home, her firm, her marriage. A year ago, she thought it was all real. She was his partner, celebrated in his world and broken by his secrets. The foundation was a sham. But that wasn't the worst part. The deepest wound was her sister. She knew who she was. Chloe Vance, designer, wife, expectant mother, a fool. A woman torn apart by the two people she trusted most. She thought of Sophie's praise, her knowing glances, the way she would touch Liam's arm. It had all been profoundly cruel. The baby kicked. A sudden, sharp motion and her path became clear. She took a breath, hand on her belly, and stood. Chloe walked to Liam and showed him the tablet. "Look, honey, our recent activities. Can you see the love?" Chloe held her stomach, keeping herself from falling apart. "It's a fraud. It's all a fraud. Liam is right here, and he always will be. With her, my own sister." Those 4 words were the end of everything. An icy dread settled, a classic Chicago chill. 1 year to the day her new life started. Chloe stood in her penthouse, holding the tablet as city lights flickered on. The chill felt like a tomb, a memory of their lies. It was just a screen displaying her new reality. She was just a woman, a wife about to have a child, seeing a future that had been stolen. Sophie returned, finding her sister and Liam staring at the screen. "Chloe, is everything all right?" She faced her sister, the woman who was her rock, her champion, the one who showed her that betrayal was about the intimacy of the lie. "I'm fine, Sophie. In fact, I'm crystal clear." She held up the tablet. "Come see the masterpiece you two created." She sat, wrapping an arm around her belly, watching her sister's face crumble. 2 women connected by blood and severed by deceit. "I used to value our bond," Chloe said. "After this, the word family will be a trigger. I'll feel that sickening moment of realization again. But now, I see you." She saw a flash of guilt in Sophie's eyes. "The betrayal didn't just break my heart. It took my sister from me. The fake smiles, the shared secrets, the empty life you helped create. It reduced me to nothing. And from this wasteland, I'll build something true." Sophie stayed quiet, looking only at Liam. The baby kicked again. "She's active tonight," Chloe said softly. "I should rest." "Just one more thing," Chloe added, wanting to remember this perfect moment of clarity. "What you've done here is a disaster, Liam." Chloe's voice was sharp with rage. "To watch you build your company with my support while you were with my sister, I'm just utterly disgusted." "Thanks, babe," he whispered, his arrogance a shield. The 2 of them watched Chloe stand, a picture of grace. As the truth settled, Chloe went upstairs. Liam stayed for a second, watching Sophie start to sob. It felt cheap, hollow, and completely his fault. This city, this life, he had incinerated it himself. She shut the bedroom door, fell onto the bed, and messaged her lawyer. From her own home, she saw the fog swallow the city she now despised. It had been 1 year since her victory, 1 year since her ruin. Tomorrow meant canceling contracts, laying off staff, and salvaging a life. But tonight was about getting through. A cold fury for the toxic marriage she had cherished and the sisterhood she had lost. Chloe Vance, a wife, a sister, a woman broken by her family, would now be rebuilt stronger than steel. She smirked at her tear-streaked face in the window. For the first time in a year, she would sleep while the ghost of her sister haunted her. And that is how Chloe Vance converted the ultimate betrayal into a $90 million divorce settlement. If her story angers you, I would be honored to hear why. Share in the comments what part of her pain resonated with you. If you know someone who needs to see you can build an empire from ruins, please send this to them. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of women turning devastation into dominance. Until next time, remember that a perfect life isn't always wrecked by a storm. Sometimes the poison comes from within.